Hi everybody, Mature Simmer here. So welcome to another edition of the Non-Aviator Flight Sim series. In this episode, I am going to teach you how to get your MCDU or your flight management computer set up to get going. Again, not at a huge level of detail, just give you the basics to get going and be able to get moving along. Depending on the aircraft you're in, depending on what you're doing, there can be vast differences with these things. I'm going to try to give you enough to get around, similar to when I did the cold and dark start video, where I used a specific plane, but said, the concepts in general, if you get the concepts, you're going to do the same type of thing. I'm going to cover I'm going to use that same type of approach here to go through it. I'm in a Airbus 320. This is specifically the Phoenix A320. This is a payware airplane, so it's a little bit higher end than you're typically going to get in the basics, but there's nothing that it is going to do in the programming of the MCDU that is significantly different than you would in, say, the fly-by-wire A320, which is a freeware version that is actually pretty good. Or any other airliner, but airliners are a little bit honestly easier to get things into and get going because they're a bit more intelligent, where if you're dealing with, say, a G1000 Garmin in maybe a Cessna 172, you don't have the integration to SimBrief. You can't pull things in as easily. You might also have what's called an EFB, or I think an electronic flight something or other. I don't even know what the B stands for. It's not that important to understand. So if you haven't figured out, given that this is a non-aviator series, I approach this from, you're not an aviation expert. I'm certainly not an aviation expert. And it kind of shows, as I do these videos, like, I've been doing this for almost 1,000 hours in the flight sim. I've been enjoying the heck out of myself. I've been successfully taking off and landing. I don't know what EFB stands for, and it's not necessary to enjoy this. You just need to know, hey, this is what they call this thing. So in this case, if I go in, I import, we're going to get this particular flight that we flew in the NASCAR series as the last SimBrief thing I had, so we're going to go ahead and use that, because why not? But basically, your flight management computer, your MCDU, is down here in an airliner. There's usually a control key, so you can kind of play around. It's control 1 in this case. Typically control 4, 5, or 3 is what I've found in most other planes. And then, there may be different menu options and so forth. And you would have to do certain things. So like the data link config in this plane is where you put your SimBrief link. So usually if you want to do SimBrief and not put everything in manually, that's what you'll want to do. But the MCDU menu will kind of take us back there, and then basically you're going into your FMGDC here. Again, because I have Navigraph, I have the latest nav database. The dates on these are not critical, but obviously this is just informing you of what your system is going to be using. And then you're going to go into Initialization, or Init. There's usually a button with some sort of name there. To pull from SimBrief, you can do Init Request. If you wanted to just key things in, you've got these buttons on the side. Again, they have names, but I'm not going to torture you with them because it doesn't matter what they're called. You just need to know that basically this little line here corresponds to that. This line's there. So if you want to make a choice on the screen, just follow the line that is closest, and that's the one that's going to let you do it. So for example, KAFW / Kilo Juliet Golf Foxtrot, I could then just go ahead and put that in there, and that would then move that up there. So this area is what's known as the scratch pad. So if you hear anybody referring to that and they say put it in your scratch pad or get it down to your scratch pad, You know, because you can, for example, okay, this isn't working, but let me go ahead and pull my flight plan in. So I'm going to do init request. And again, it takes a bit. It's trying to simulate, in this case, the reality that it isn't instantaneous. But again, KAFW slash, Kilo Alpha Foxtrot Whiskey slash Kilo Juliet Quebec Foxtrot. So again, sometimes that's a good reason to put it in. I misread it. And then my alternate is Kilo Golf Sierra Oscar, which is Greensboro, and that would get us to the alternate. In this case, the integration doesn't pull this information in. So I would need to get that information, from my SimBrief. So you just go look in SimBrief and you figure out what you need. So you look under cost index, it'll be listed as CI in your SimBrief. That basically determines kind of the fuel burn for the flight. What's our cruise altitude? So I see that our our altitude is 37,000. So anything at 18,000 or above, you're going to put in as flight level, FL. And then the computer, again, will determine this is the air temperature at that altitude. You don't have to know that. You don't have to enter a slash with the 54. And then the flight number, and this has no functionality within the system other than to maybe tie things together, but you can enter that. And again, there's going to be variation in how things work. So some flight management computers are going to have a next page, a previous page. The Boeings have arrows, so you can see there's an arrow here. That's basically telling me there's another page. So I can just go back and forth between those pages here. But what you want to do is start up / initialize the aircraft. That's the first thing you're typically going to do. Is you're going to get those basic pieces of data in so that the plane knows what it is. Sometimes you can just go ahead and click this and it will fill it in. In my case here, it will not do that. So again, I'm going to look this up off of my SimBrief, and if you need to know where that is and so forth, you can drop me some questions. Some aircraft will pull it in, so you'll get that in. Then you hit fuel planning. All right, and there you go, and it calculates that, and then you just confirm it, and so it's got some of that information in there. But that's usually what you're doing to initialize things. So you're basically dealing with your fuel, and you're getting your base information in so that it knows where it's at. You may have to give it, position information. The Boeing goes ahead and does it, but sometimes you'll come in and it'll tell you, hey, you need to initialize your position. You'll typically go in, you'll in this case, let's see. All right, these buttons aren't doing, none of these are doing what I need. So many times you press these and it'll show up in your scratch pad. So what I was trying to show is it'll tell you where it thinks it's at, and you'll pick that and then put it down in the item below, and that initializes your system and basically says, yep, I'm agreeing that this is where I'm at. And that's like your physical position on the planet is what the positional the position in it is, the position initialization. So you can see here, again, I don't have any lines on my multifunction display, my MFD, and so that tells me, like, hey, I don't have everything in my computer yet. So the next thing you're typically going to want to do is you're going to want to deal with your airports. So you can go into airport or flight plan. It just depends. You need to get familiar with your particular computer in the Boeing. I know you go in here and you're always going to look for an airport and a departure and an airport and arrival. So in this case, I'm going to do a departure. we're leaving on 34 left, and you can see again the computer knows a lot of information. It knows the length of the runways, it knows the headings and so forth. So that's the benefit of a system like this. Now I know I need the CUSO 1 departure. I don't see that. They're typically alphabetical. So again, could be next page, previous page, which is what you'd have in a Boeing, but in the Airbus here, it's arrows. I think I may have said that backwards on the other one. So there's CUSO 1, and then I have the fork transition. So I pick that, and you can see in this case it puts that up. And then you're always going to have the temporary, or you could go look at the temporary flight plan if you want to take a peek at it. But, you know, I'm comfortable that I know what that is, and this is now starting to give me the flight plan info. And because it has certain data that I've initialized, you know, this is now working. So my end fuel on board, that's what EFOB is. If this is not a positive number, when you're looking at that, wherever it appears in your MCDU, that's a bad thing. You're going to run out of fuel before you get there. Now again, I know I'm complete here because now at this departure airport I have a runway. Here at this arrival airport, I don't yet have a runway. So I know I need to go in here, hit arrival, and then I am arriving on 20 because that's where I have an ILS. And you can see, you know, I can do an RNAV on 02 or 20, and I can just do an approach on 02 or 20. So there's multiple ways I could program this depending on how I wanted to fly in. If you want to understand approaches better, I'll encourage you to go to the approach video that will explain kind of how to read the charts, but also explains, you know, a little bit of the difference between them as well, so that you can decide what you'd want to use. All right, so I have that, and on the ILS, I'm doing the Jules 1 arrival, and then I'm doing the Thrasher transition. And once again, I'm going to insert that. And so again, now I've got KJFQ20. Now again, there's no left or right. Basically at this airport, what that's telling me is I don't have that many runways, and you can tell from what the computer let me pick, I really have one runway that I can just come in, obviously, from either direction, depending on the wind. Once you have your airport set up, then what I'd encourage you to do is you want to get your performance data in, which is what perf is. And again, I may be having all this information, or these words wrong. I'm explaining, again, from a non-aviator perspective, how I understand it, how I keep it straight in my head, and what it does. But what you need to set is what flaps you're going to have. So again, that will vary by aircraft, but Airbuses don't really use degrees. They use settings. So it's basically 1, 2, 3 instead of, say, 5, 10, 20. So if you're in a Boeing, you'd be putting in 5 degrees, 10 degrees. But here in this, I'm just putting flaps 1, and that would be the base setting. All right, and in most planes, you'd be able to hit these buttons, and the V1 speed, the VR speed, and the V2 speed would populate. So for information, again, it's included in the takeoff video, but really it's probably more relevant here in the programming, so I won't link to the takeoff video, but if you want to look at that, you can. V1 is basically the speed that you need to be at, and basically it's warning you at that point when you hit V1 that you're not going to really be able to stop on the runway without running off the runway. So you're kind of at a point of no return where you need to get that plane off the ground if you're at V1 speed. VR is where you should be rotating, where you should be taking off, so that's the speed you want to get to before you take off. And then V2, if I recall, is the speed that you want to be at once you're going, where if suddenly you lost an engine, you'd be able to continue on one engine. Okay, so in this system, your departure performance, you're basically pulling in your load sheet, and then you're calculating and this gets the v-speeds for you, and you can send them to the MCDU. So it's similar to what an MCDU would normally do. It's just instead of hitting the buttons and having it show up and then moving it over, that's how you get it in this particular model of aircraft. So what this is telling us is my V1 and VR speed are actually the same. So I can take off with the weight I'm at because I've entered that in my initialization, so the computer knows how heavy I am. I can take off at 149, and once I get to 151, I'm in good shape. If you want, you can go ahead and check these other phases before you take off. I like to do that. So for example, I'll get my approach basically set up, and there isn't a lot of data in here because it's a small airport, but QNH is your altimeter, so you're putting it in. You don't have to put the dot, you noticed. Temperature will affect some things on the plane, so it's good to know what the temperature is. And then the wind, that's where I don't have anything, so we'll just put 0 at 0 because we don't know. And then off the ILS chart, so I put that in. The plane is reacting as if we're landing now. So a lot of times you'll program this while you're in the air, but you don't have to. But the reason I like to do this is then I can adjust these if I need to, but if something's going on in flight or whatever, I don't have to panic that I don't have that information in. The last thing to check is then make sure your flight plan doesn't have any discontinuities or holes in it. So you're just scrolling through it, in this case using the arrow or the next page. Again, so there's a discontinuity there. So, and in this case again, if it lets you put it in the scratch pad, you can. If not, what I know is I need to hit clear. Alright, so this one's a little more complicated. Normally you could clear that line, but because there's a manual direction, I need to go manual and clear that, and then say I'm going to LEMO, and then insert. And then if we go down, what it will do, now that manual is gone, I can go there, pick LEMO, and that should work. So this is actually more complex than I really wanted it to be. But now you can see the continuity is gone. And so, this is actually a good example to show you, kind of how sometimes you just need to figure pieces out. And so what this is then telling you is the speed it's going to be at. So but because we're getting lower here, it's not at Mach speed, which is what these are, 0.78. And then this is the height. And so again, the computer's going to determine where you need to go down. You're going to see things here like limit and decelerator. So at 10,000 feet in the US, you've got to be down at 250. And then it's going to decelerate further because now we're going down to 191. And so these magenta indicators here are basically saying there's restrictions. So if I look, I have to be above 4,000 feet at this point. And I'm going to be able to do that. Like if it's magenta in this aircraft, it's telling me the computer feels it can achieve that. If it cannot, they'll appear in yellow. But basically, once you have everything clear and no discontinuities, you have a flight plan and you are ready to go. The way you verify that, so typically what you would do is you would look at your map and see if you had a path, but the problem we have, even if we go out to the far range, is we have this waypoint, which is kind of at the far distance there, but we can look at the plan here and see going to Fork and ELD. So if we go down there, Fork and ELD and so forth, that we're good. So you can always try to verify that things are okay, but if you do those steps, so as a review, you do your initialization, so you get your base flight information, your initial fuel prediction, as it says ready. If you import your plan, or even if you enter it, then go to performance, set your flaps, get your V1 speeds ready to go. Look through any other phases that you can make a change to. You can set up your approach phase if you'd like. Go into your flight plan, set up your departure and your arrival information with the runways and the arrival approaches and departures, along with any transitions that you have, so that all of your speeds and altitudes can be calculated. Make sure that you have no gaps. Either some flight computers will list as discontinuity, or there might be other versions of it, and you can also get rid of any vectors or manuals to try to just make everything directly connected. You can leave vectors in if you want, especially if you have air traffic involved, whether it's something like beyond ATC or real air traffic with VATSIM. The challenge with VATSIM and leaving vectors is if the controller signs off before you get there. So you can see here we've got 0 time is what will always show up at the start, and then you can see 2 hours and 7 minutes later is when we're expected. Well, it's highly possible on VATSIM that a controller is gone that is there now. And so if you're reliant on that to give you vectors, you're ultimately going to be giving yourself direction. And so what I've always just chosen to do is to go ahead and work through that myself and just connect them. So one other thing, and I don't know that, we can go out here, I can show that. So you can see I've got salve and I'm on plan. So this is normal for most systems that you'll have. If I now keep stepping through the plan, you'll see it's going to put the points in line there on the plan as I go through. So now we're at Thrasher, and then Penfi, Hartwell. And basically what you're looking for is, again, a point where the flight path stops, but we don't see one. We see a complete flight path all the way through, where if I had left manual, for example, we would have had an empty spot. So you can always go to plan, and this will also let you plan ahead that, okay, your likely descent right now is listed between Zell and Jules, but the challenge here is because there's not a SID here that is taking you to salve that comes from the runway, basically, until you get further out, you don't really see it. So as I said, different computers, different systems can be pretty significantly different. If you're trying to get things into, say, a T1000, that is a very different animal than doing it the way we did it here in a commercial airliner. If you want videos on that and you want me to walk through just putting a flight plan in there, or at least how you would go about doing it, but basically you're doing it with knobs, it's a lot more manual. You can't always pull things in from SimBrief and so forth. And you're doing things on your PFD. You don't have an actual computer to work with, so you're working on this display with menus that are a little less than intuitive. But there's detail out there, again, from people who are absolutely going to be coming from an aviation standpoint. So if you find yourself struggling with that, ask me some questions. I'll be happy to help you out. I've worked with, I think, most of the standard items at this point. And again, the T1000 is kind of the big one, and then you've got the general aviation pieces. The Piper Comanche, which again is a payware aircraft. If you like little GA aircraft, it's a beautiful aircraft. Just a lot of realism. It actually tracks how long you use it and so forth. I'm sure you'll see it in some series at some point that I'll utilize it in. But it requires a lot more involvement to utilize, and it has an autopilot, but it's a very unique autopilot. So it's really more do most of the work, point the aircraft in the direction you want to go, and then it'll kind of keep it there for you. It's much more hands-on, where in a 737, for example, you could take off and Other than adjusting the altitude knob at some point, there's almost nothing you need to do to go ahead and land the plane. Like, it can go on autopilot. On the Airbus, for example, you have to manually start the descent with the altitude selector. There are nuances for aircraft to do that. I'm not planning on really covering aircraft in this non-aviation flight sim series. If you've got a compelling reason or a way that you think would be helpful to you, I can do that, but there's, again, a lot of material out there, and while, again, I get it's not coming at it from the perspective I am, so it can easily become quite overwhelming. There's just so many variations of aircraft and so many things, and there's different ways to deal with pieces of it, too. I mean, I have certain preferences. I mean, I can tell you what the startup sequence should be for this based on checklists, this and that. Those are kind of common. Everything's a bit different in how you might choose to use the aircraft versus, what I might suggest. But there's also a ton of material out there, and I only have so many aircraft. Really, the payware ones I have are PMDG 737, this plane, and Comanche. Other than that, I have not bought any planes at this point because I'm just happy with what I've got. And that's, I think, what you'll find as a non-aviator is, once you've got a couple planes you enjoy and you've got things to cover the distance. So again, the base 747-8, for example, is my long distance flyer. I think there's a couple other like Airbuses that have come out recently that can go 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 miles. But I'm okay with the base game 747. And while it may not be what they call study level, which means it's got everything modeled appropriately and it behaves as the real plane does, I'm not that put off by that. So I'm okay with flying and having it be close. And I'm also expecting in Flight Sim 2024 that's going to be coming out soon that who knows what we'll get. I mean, we may get some incredible standard aircraft. The great news is that we were being told that the 2020 add-ons are expected to work in 2024. So all these payware planes and stuff should move over and work just fine. That remains to be seen. But in any event, I'm kind of dragging out this closing. But that should give you enough to get a flight management computer programmed and ready to go, and yourself ready to take off and so forth. And I've got other videos on just how to head out and so forth out on the channel for the Non-Aviator series. Easiest way is to go to the playlist, and that'll show you all the topics that were covered. If you've enjoyed this but haven't dropped a like, please consider doing that. And if you are not a subscriber to the channel, please consider that as well. I will see you next time.